So what do we have in this old battered guitar case here, which is held together by tape? The Takamine EG332C. So this guitar is very significant to me in a number of different ways, and I acquired it over 26 years back on a trip back home to Liverpool. I was wandering around a cash converter shop, like a second-hand shop, and I saw a ticket on this guitar, and I thought that can't be right. It was only £75, which was round about $110, something like that. I picked it up and I played it. It sounded great. And it played well as well. So I thought, what's going on here? So I asked the guy, I said, is this still for sale? He said, yeah, but there's one problem with it. I thought, oh, here goes. What's the problem? He said, the pickup doesn't work. Well, I could see that it had a pickup because it's got an EQ here. But it really wasn't a game changer for me at the time because I just wanted something which was a little bit better than the only other acoustic I had at the time, which was an Ibanez or an Ibanez. And it was very average, the setup and the action wasn't particularly great on it. So this, in many ways, was a big step up from that. So like I say, it was a no-brainer. I handed over the cash and couldn't get out the door quick enough. Okay, now the construction of the guitar, I've never definitively been able to say with any certainty. Different sides tell me different things. And in all honesty, it really doesn't matter because at the time I bought this guitar, I had played guitars far worse. In fact, the one I owned, like I say, the Ibanez, was nowhere near as good. So this was definitely a step up. And when you put that with the price that I paid, it was an absolute no-brainer. Having said that, many of the sites differ slightly in the opinion of what the guitar construction is. So the back and sides, in all likelihood, are laminated with like a mahogany, and the top is either a laminated spruce or a solid spruce, and it's difficult to tell. Sometimes you can tell just by looking in the sound hole here, and you can see if there's like a sandwich effect with the wood. It doesn't look like there is on here, so I've always felt it might have a solid top. The fingerboard is rosewood and that's bound. And so when you put all that together for the price I paid for it, it was an absolute no-brainer. Now I've used this guitar more than any other guitar in my collection when it comes to live work. It has done hundreds upon hundreds of gigs and it's been a real workhorse and paid for itself many, many times over. And it does raise the question, how good does a guitar have to be in a live situation? I would argue that a guitar doesn't have to be a top end guitar because when you've got a bass guitar playing, a drummer bashing the hell out of his drums, and a vocalist and another guitarist and things like that, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. The other thing as well, which I was very aware of, is the fact that if you had a top end guitar which was being thrown in and out of a van every night, say 200 times a year, you'd be very worried about your investment in that situation. I would, at least. There's no way I would put my Martin Treble 28 in that situation. It's just not something I would do. Whereas with a guitar like this, don't get me wrong, you can see, you may not even guess that it had done so many gigs because it's in such great condition. You know, once it's in a hard case, theoretically, that's what takes the banging, as you can see at the beginning of the video. Another thing to bear in mind is that over the last 20 to 30 years, guitars have improved massively. So when I first started out, if you spent a couple of $100 on a guitar, you were not going to get anything that good, right? In fact, it was going to be pretty difficult to play. You'd probably have to have it set up, and you'd be limited to how good that setup might be because fundamentally the guitar just wasn't terribly well made. But when I look at what you can buy now for, let's say $300, you know, roundabout there, you can get yourself a beautiful instrument for that kind of price. So that's something that's really, really changed over the years. And again, it kind of begs the question, how important is an expensive guitar? What are your thoughts? I'm interested in that, guys. So some people will probably ask, well, what would you say the differences are between a mid-range or a budget guitar and a high-end guitar? I think that primarily one of the main things is the finish of the guitar. So many of the guitars made on a budget now are made in the likes of Taiwan or China and places like that. And so in many instances, it's the finish that suffers because they have to make so many of them that they can't give each instrument the individual attention it might need. So the finish might suffer in some small way. Not always, but sometimes perhaps. And that's not something that you generally will come across with a high-end instrument. It will have had checks, it will be finished to a high degree. The tone woods which are used are going to be another huge factor. That's going to bring something very different to the table. The setup, the playability, the tone, the feel. So I don't want to say that high-end guitars, don't have that extra mile because clearly they do. But how necessary is it? Only you can be the judge of that. So, for example, there are many people out there in different circumstances. You could be a young kid who's just left college and doesn't have a lot of money to throw in an instrument. So that's good news for you because you can go get a budget instrument which is going to play very, very nicely. It could be that you're retired and you've worked your whole life and you can go out and buy a nice instrument. Well, if you can, there's nothing wrong with that, especially. It's all about what you can afford in that kind of sense. But I think another thing to consider is that if you're just starting out, there's very little point in going and buying a very, very expensive instrument until you know for sure that it's something that you're going to stick with. So you're better off, in a way, buying something which isn't too expensive just to see if it's something you're going to stick with. So, probably one of the most common questions I get asked is what are the main considerations when buying an instrument? What should I be thinking about? Well, you could make this as complex or as simple as you want. I want to keep it very simple, right? And just talk about two or three things, which I personally feel are the things to look for. And that is playability being one. So, how well the instrument plays is huge, it's a huge factor. If the setup on the guitar is good and you can play it comfortably, it means you're going to come back to it and you're going to play it. And that is a huge, huge thing along with the sound of the guitar. Now, that's a slightly bigger kind of issue in a way because that's where the quality of the instrument will show. But I personally believe that when you're starting out, and even if you've been playing for a little while, it's very, very difficult to hear the difference between, let's say, a mid-range guitar and an expensive guitar. I play a guitar like this one. Like I've said to you, I've played it for over 26 years, and to this day, it still sounds great. So there you have a few things that you can think about should you ever be in a position where you want to buy your first guitar, a second guitar, an upgrade, whatever it might be, right? Hopefully some of those little points will help you along the way. And just remember that it's very important to not be fooled into thinking an expensive guitar is going to make you a better player, because that isn't the case. You could give me a Mickey Mouse guitar and I'll still play you a tune on it. What's important is what your ears tell you. If you pick up a guitar in a guitar store and you play it and it sounds pleasing to you, that's very, very important. If it plays well, that is another very, very important thing. So I would suggest that those two things alone should shape the type of instrument that you end up buying. That's my own personal feeling on that. But what have your experiences been? I'm equally as interested in that. I've shared this with you, and I hope to come back and talk about some of the other instruments which have been very influential in my playing. If you're interested in that, please let me know and I will come back and we could go through my acoustic collection and I can tell you a little bit about how they've been so influential in my own playing. But like I say, I'd be equally as interested to hear about your experiences with your guitars, what shaped what you've bought, what you've liked about what you've bought, what you haven't liked, and all those type of things. And I'm sure that many people within our Patreon community would also be interested in hearing about these things. So please do share those things down below. It's always great to hear your feedback on these type of things. And as ever, I'm very, very grateful for your continued support. Without that, I couldn't really do what I do here on Patreon. So thank you very much for that. And I'll be back soon with another lesson. So in the meantime, you all take care.